I would say there's no single or even small group of modeling criteria that drove the result of the difference between the proposed action and the no action alternative. One of the points that I tried to make in my rebuttal analysis was that the proposed action is depicted by the imposition of the North Delta diversion. So we have a diversion, and there are operating criteria associated with that diversion. All of the other modeling criteria, some of which is operational, some of which is their modeling devices, and I could rattle off balancing rules, allocation, St. Louis rule curve, the export estimate curve, all these things that people have talked about. That set of modeling devices did not change between the no action and the proposed action. Rule curve did change, but that in and of itself did not drive the answers that we have taken from this study.
And you are sure that the things that did not change, the modeling assumptions that did not change between the no action and the proposed project, are appropriately constant, meaning the things that you are changing as a result of the water fix would not affect those assumptions that you insist are constant.
I do agree with that. I believe that the modeling that was done for this project was appropriate. Both the no action and the proposed action, as we have tried to describe in this proceeding, reflect an operational philosophy of the CVP, speaking for reclamation, that we feel is consistent with current operations. The modeling criteria in both the no action and the proposed action are consistent with that operating philosophy.
Any other questions?
Just one thing to add, and I totally agree with Ms. Parker, and just to say that it's not changing between no action and water fix. I mean, in our modeling, we had the same level of assumptions in between no action and water fix scenarios.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for your patience with us. Thank you for the extra work that you have put into 1143. As Chair Marcus says, these are things that are well familiar to you, but very complicated to the rest of us. And so it should come as no surprise that we have a lot of confusion, and therefore we're always seeking additional explanation and clarity. So thank you. All right, with that, we'll ask Mr. Mizell for you to bring up your third panel, and we will do direct presentation for about an hour, you said? That means we'll take our lunch break at noon. All right. Mr. Keeling.
Thank you. Tom Keeling for the San Joaquin County Protestants. Consistent with your prior rulings and what we understand to be your will with respect to the process of this proceeding, wanted to give you a heads up that we want to make a motion to strike. We, Ms. Meserve and I, we're going to be moving to strike the testimony of 2 of the witnesses on this panel.
Please do.
And we understand that you wanted us to make such a motion before they testify or before they introduce evidence, so I'm asking what you would prefer we do on that.
Do it now, please.
Okay. I'm going to make the motion to strike the testimony of Dr. Hansen. Ms. Meserve will be moving to strike the testimony of, I believe it's Dr. Hutton. Dr. Hansen's written testimony, which is DWR 1223, purports to rebut opinions and statements in the protestant's testimony. Of course, it's rebuttal, or supposed to be. However, when we turn to the cited portions of protestant's testimony that we are told are being rebutted, the opinions and statements supposedly being rebutted are not there. This is not rebuttal testimony. The witness first attributes to the other side a statement or position they never made, and then offers testimony to rebut the statement or position that was never made. It's a typical, classic straw dog exercise. On pages 2 and 3 of DWR 1223, and if it would assist, perhaps Mr. Long could put that up.
Please do.
On pages 2 through 3, you will find the list of protestants' testimony. Dr. Hansen's opinion is intended, or says it rebuts. You'll see it starting at around line 23, actually up at line 18, and then continuing the rest of the page, and then again on the top of page 3 down to line 13 of page 3. And then on page 3, he identifies his rebuttal opinions that he's about to give. You can see that they take 2 forms. First, those 5 bullet points called summary of testimony, which continues on to the, and then up at the top, going back up to the top, Mr. Long says also, I am responding to several parties whose experts suggested that the board's 2010 flow criteria report and the board's phase 2 technical basis report should be accepted without modification. So those are the opinions that he's going to give. And then in his conclusion on page 27, he repeats, I think verbatim, the bullet point opinions that he says on page 3 he's going to give. Classic, you tell the audience, what are you going to say? Then you say it, and then you tell them what you just said. So it follows that form. Let's take a look at what I'm talking about here. Let's go back to pages 2 and 3. In fact, page 3, line 25 and following, Mr. Long. The witness states his opinion that, quote, multiple authors have concluded that flow alone cannot be used to restore the delta. Then he states that the delta, in this bullet point he continues, the delta as it existed before large-scale alteration by humans cannot be recreated. And he adds at the end of that bullet point paragraph, quote, Buchanan et al. Also concluded that increased flow alone will not be sufficient to resolve the low salmonid survival in the delta. But none of the protestants' testimony cited on pages 2 and 3, Mr. Hansen's testimony, states that flow alone can be used to restore the delta, or that flow alone will be sufficient to resolve the low salmonid survival in the delta. And none of that testimony states that the delta as it existed before large-scale alteration by humans can be recreated. None at all.
Hold on. I know you're on a roll, but I'm going to stop you so that I can better understand this. My understanding of this bullet that you just focused on, starting on line 25, is that it is actually his rebuttal testimony. It's not the testimony to which he is rebutting.
I understand that too, but what does this respond to if that's his rebuttal testimony? Nobody stated those opinions that he's rebutting.
So let's backtrack, because I think you're moving ahead here. Are you alleging that on pages, at the bottom of page 2 and beginning of page 3, that where there is citation of testimony to which Dr. Hansen is rebutting, that those citations are incorrect, that he's somehow misinterpreted the rebuttal, the testimony to which he is rebutting?
I don't think he's misinterpreted anything. They're not there. The statements that he is rebutting do not exist there or anywhere else. Can you imagine you sat through this for 2 years. Have you heard any witness say in writing or orally that flow alone is sufficient? And I was curious, so I went back and read every word of the testimony he cites. It's not there. Have you ever heard a witness in this proceeding say, we think the delta can be recreated as it was before human alteration?
Hold on, Mr.
not there.
Keeling. Again, let's look on page 3, beginning of page 3,
Right.
where he says he is responding to parties that suggest the flow criteria report and the phase 2 technical basis report should be accepted without modification. Do you disagree that there are experts who testified in this proceeding who made that suggestion regarding the flow criteria report and the technical basis report?
Absolutely, I disagree. I searched every word. There is not a single sentence or statement in any of this. Let's go through. You want to go through each one of these? We can do this. Let's go through, for example, he cites CSPA 202, which is CSPA 202 errata is Mr. Schutz's testimony, okay? And he cites pages 7 through 11. But when you go to CSPA 202 errata, we find Mr. Schutz opining that because the services, the federal services, are not at this hearing, it becomes essential to review what CDFW, USFWS, and NIMS have already said, and that their analysis in the 2010 Informational Delta Flow Criteria proceeding is of particular importance. That's what he says. And then he goes on to summarize a few of the services' discussions. Nothing about accepting wholesale or whole hog the 2010 report. He goes on to page 9, where he continues his summary of some of the services' comments and analyses, never opining that there ought to be a wholesale adoption without modification of the report. It goes on pages 10 and 11 with the same. You're just summarizing the 10, 11, and 12, summarizing these analyses.
So, Mr. Keeling, your assertion is that Dr. Hansen either misunderstood or misrepresented the testimony of your and other protestants' witnesses, to which he then rebuts.
Yes, whether he misinterpreted or anything else doesn't matter. The question that the hearing officers have addressed when this came up in prior rebuttal was, does the rebuttal testimony actually rebut the testimony it's supposed to be rebutting? Now, I can walk us through. For example,
Hold on. I'm not asking you to walk us through every one of them. I'm just trying to understand the crux of your motion or your whatever it is.
On top of that,
Okay.
based on prior rulings from the hearing officers on rebuttal being stricken as not being proper rebuttal, the hearing officers have demanded more than an attenuated, amorphous, or purely subjective interpretation. You know, it's one thing for a witness to say, so, well, in my view, that so-and-so's testimony sort of suggested that, so that's
I
just...
understand our ruling,
All
Mr.
right.
Keeling.
Now, I'm making an offer of proof. I'm willing to walk here right now through every single piece of testimony cited. But if you don't want me to do that, I won't. We can do it. But I would also offer, if you prefer, to do voir dire on the witness on this.
All right.
And so that is the basis of my motion to strike. We could go down some of these other bullet points, but it's the same. And I believe Ms. Meserve is making a motion with respect to Dr. Hutton.
All right, let's hear from Ms. Meserve, and then I'll ask Mr. Berliner or Mr. Mizell to respond.
Morning. Yes, there's many of the same citations are used as a basis for Dr. Hutton's testimony as well that are in the Hansen testimony. But as
That would be 1224?
yes, so similar to the Hansen testimony, citations are provided to which rebuttal is supposedly being provided, but when one looks for the statements in the cited testimony, those statements aren't there. And so my understanding is that from our February 21st, 2017 ruling, that the rebuttal evidence should be responsive to evidence presented in connection with the case in chief. And it appears that both the Hutton and the Hansen papers appear to be material that the petitioners would like to have the hearing consider, but aren't specifically tied to pieces of testimony. And so the focus of the Hutton piece is apparently that, he believes that the diversion of fresh water and the alteration of natural flow patterns in recent years and decades, that's what he's addressing and does a very long paper about, but none of the the case in chief testimony he cites is making the assertion he's apparently rebutting. And so, again, we could kind of go through the details, but it's a lot of the same sites, and it's kind of disturbing because, some of the citations provided in both Hansen and Hutton are, for instance, a transcript where the flow report is mentioned. There's no assertion made whatsoever. Again, like for both the cross-examination of Dr. Rosenfeld and Mr. Baxter that are mentioned in both of these witnesses' testimony, they're just mentions of the flow report, there's no urging of a wholesale adoption of the flow report. So it appears that both of these testimonies are improper rebuttal, and there's insufficient information in the testimony itself with respect to Hutton to show that the materials, which go some 38 pages long, are responding to testimony in the case in chief. So that's the basis.
And Ms. Meserve and Mr. Keeling,